So I just want to start with Dave. I've known Dave since we were little kids. I know I was a teenager. He's a little older than I am. So he was the cute big friend that used to hang out with us. And I've watched Dave through his career. I think, Dave, at one point you started with marketing when I first met you. And then I know that he went to the college, and I kind of lost him there for a little while. And the two of us hooked up in the sense of friendship again, met up at our church. So we've been going to the same church for a number of years, and I can't believe how time flies, because it just seems like yesterday you were heading to Saudi Arabia, and Dave kind of disappeared for a period of time off of Facebook and everything, all his social media, because of the trip he was going to take. And so for me to be able to invite and hear Dave's experience is going to be, just very powerful. So I'm really excited about that. But let me tell you a little bit about his professional background. Dave is a seasoned member of Niagara College Canada's senior administrative team with more than 35 years of experience in education and training sector, and is presently the Associate Vice President of Academics. Starting his career at Niagara College as a faculty member in the School of Business, he's been in the college administration for over 24 years. Recently, Dave has served as the college's Dean in International Partnerships, leading the posted in Saudi Arabia as founding campus principal for Niagara College Saudi operations to oversee the initial development of 2 offshore campuses. And as you said, it's expanded now. Dave will share his experience in establishing these academic operations within a truly different environment and culture, and the various challenges faced along the way, both in Saudi and at home here in Canada. So I'd like to thank you so much for speaking with us tonight, Dave, and I'll be your technical backup, which is really scary.
Great, thanks, Lori. I appreciate the invitation. I'm happy to be here and share some of my experience with you. With the small group, we'll keep it fairly informal, and as we go along, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask questions as I'm going. I have a larger presentation, which I've tried to whittle down and condense 2 years worth into just about 40 minutes. So hopefully during that time, there's time for you to ask questions, so feel free to jump in and ask questions. What I usually do when I do this presentation is I make sure I give some context to it, making sure people understand Saudi Arabia, where it is, and what it really represents. Saudi Arabia is a country of 30 million people, and of that 30 million, 10 million are expatriates. Only 20 million Saudis are part of that 30 million. It's also important to know that if you're born in Saudi Arabia, you're not automatically Saudi. You have to be born of either a blood mother or father in order to be granted Saudi citizenship. So in 2013, Saudi Arabia, as part of their progressive development, declared that they were going to start 38 vocational colleges across the kingdom. And they put out a global tender for operation of these colleges. And there are a number of different schools from around the world that applied. Niagara College applied for one in Taif that focused on tourism, hospitality, and business. And I was approached and asked, are you going to be interested in maybe heading this up for us if we win it? And I thought, what are the odds of Niagara College winning a global bid? And the whole system is called the Colleges of Excellence, 19 men's colleges and 18 women's colleges. And as time went on, Niagara College won the bid, to my surprise, and they approached me and said, well, you said you would go. So I packed up and was getting ready to go, and I realized I didn't know a lot about Saudi Arabia. And so I thought, I need to do some research to see exactly what I'm going to get myself into. So when it comes to Saudi Arabia, I always ask people, what comes to mind when you think of Saudi Arabia? And people think of, they think of oil. They think of rich sheikhs and princes. Desert and sand, obviously. Women dressed in black, as the picture represents. Arabian horses, terrorism, and it's a dangerous country. And when you say, I'm going to Saudi Arabia, the first thing people say is, oh, be careful, it's so dangerous there. But is it really dangerous? So I started to look at some statistics. If you look at a study done by the World Bank on homicides across the world, Saudi Arabia actually is about half of Nicaragua. And you can see the comparisons to Mexico, the United States, Honduras, Jamaica. And Saudi Arabia's homicide and violence rate is actually very, very low. Violent crime, actually Saudi Arabia ranks 102nd. Canada is 80th, which means Canada is a more violent country than Saudi Arabia. So when you ask somebody, are you going, if you say you're going to Mexico, or if you're saying you're going to Jamaica or Spain, they say, have a good time. Or if you're going to travel to Chicago, Los Angeles, or New York, they say, have a good time. If you tell them you're going to Saudi Arabia, there's this stigma about it because of the media and what people think they know about Saudi Arabia. Canada being 80th, Spain's actually 95th, which is more violent than Saudi Arabia. Costa Rica is 84. Italy's 83. France, 75. Germany, 73. United Kingdom, 71. Jamaica, 47. Dominican Republic, and you notice a lot of these places are very popular vacation destinations. United States is 14, and Mexico is number 3. And how many people go to Mexico on a regular basis and don't think twice? Well, Saudi Arabia is 102nd. So are there issues? Well, for example, what does a country face when it comes to cultural development? Well, there's economic policy and fiscal management, international relations, treatment of indigenous peoples, role and authority of women, capital punishment, and public executions. And you look at the countries around the world, and all developing countries have faced some of these issues at some time or another in their development. So let's look at the Canadian record. Up until the 1980s, Indian children were taken from their families at 7 years of age and forced to go to government church residential schools, and thousands of women were sterilized, needing only the approval of the school principal. That's part of Canada's history. Now, I'm setting this up only because of what I'm going to talk about later. Women only received the right to vote federally in Canada in 1919 and provincially. Actually, my thing is actually blocking it there. I think it was 1940 in Quebec. And it wasn't until 1929 that Canadian women were legally declared persons and could hold a Senate seat. That's in Canada. Capital punishment in Canada was practiced until 1869, and capital punishment continued until 1962. And the last woman executed in Canada by capital punishment was in 1953. So, capital punishment around the world. How does Saudi represent itself? This picture here that you see on the screen is a picture I took in Riyadh. This is affectionately known as Chop Chop Square. Chop Chop Square is where public executions take place, and they are public executions. You can see kids riding their bikes, you can see women walking around. A van will pull up, they'll pull somebody out, and they perform a beheading right there in the street, and then they put them back in the van, and off they go. So, and that sounds very, very barbaric. But only people who've committed drug crimes or sexual crimes are executed. So let's look at the top 5 countries and capital punishment around the world. China is number 1. There's so many, they don't even have a number. It's thousands have been executed or sentenced to death. Iran is number 2. Saudi Arabia actually is number 3. Number 4 is Iraq. And does anybody want to guess who number 5 is? United States at 220 executions. Now, this was source is Amnesty International. So again, I'm just trying to put a context around what the kind of media attention we got as Niagara College when we went to Saudi Arabia. there was huge media backlash to us saying that, why is Niagara College operating in a country where they have public executions and they're treated so poorly as far as women is concerned? And also, why is Niagara College participating in a men's-only college? The college that we opened up, where it was meant for men. So the 19 colleges in Saudi under the College of Excellence were male colleges, and 18 were women. The education there is segregated. They do not mix gender within the educational institutions. And we were criticized for that, saying, why are we operating a men-only college? It should be integrated. Well, this isn't Canada, and they have their culture and their laws. But given that, there's, again, a number of different, the Globe and Mail, the CBC News, all jumped on the bandwagon saying, why is Niagara College involved in Saudi Arabia? And the big focus point was for a men-only college. Like, what about the women? Well, at the same time, in Canada, Upper Canada College had a big marketing campaign on, and guess what? Upper Canada College in Canada is a men-only college. But they didn't print that, and they didn't advertise that. They focused on our situation. Also in the Toronto Sun at the same time, there's an article called "It's Time We Talked About Male-Only Universities," because through research, it's been evidenced that women and men learn better in segregated educational situations. Men actually perform better because of less distractions. And that's exactly why the Saudis do it. In fact, there are so many private schools for boys in Canada that they have to have a website for people to search them and look at the various details of the various colleges. So while we were being criticized for doing it, they were doing it here in Canada. Now, we also looked at aspects of human rights, and we were criticized for operating in a country like that. And you were just talking about the UK, the British Empire. The British Empire, if you look at their history, their history is, again, it's horrendous. The Boer concentration camps of 1900 in South Africa, where 22,000 children died under the British rule. Aden torture centers in 1966 in Yemen. In India, there's a massacre of 1,000 people at a peaceful demonstration by the British Army in 1919. And also is the British support of Wahhabism, which is really the foundation of Sharia law, which is the basis of extreme Muslim terrorism, was supported by the British Empire. And the King Saud, who you see here, was the founder of Saudi Arabia, and it's his family that actually are the heirs to the throne. The present king, Salman, is a descendant of King Saud, and it was because of the British Empire that extremism was able to take a foothold in Saudi Arabia. So let's look at development Saudi Arabia and UAE. Again, here's a map of Saudi Arabia. You can see Riyadh and Mecca on the west coast there. This is what Dubai looks like. Dubai is a small country on the east coast of the Arabian Peninsula. And this is what Dubai looks like now in 2017. The building in the middle there is the Burj Khalifa, the tallest building in the world. And actually, the Saudis are building a building that's going to be higher than that in Jeddah, which should be finished within the next 2 or 3 years. Now, my point here is that this is what Dubai looks like now. This is what it looked like in 1950. So within a very short period of time, they went from this to having the biggest metropolis in the world. This is Riyadh. This is the capital of Saudi Arabia. That's the Kingdom Tower in the middle there, which is the centerpiece of Riyadh. This is what it looks like now. This is what it looked like in 1960. So my point here is that they came into billions of dollars worth of oil in a very short period of time. So is it fair to compare our Western cultural norms to a country that really hasn't had the opportunity to develop that we've had over a period of time to develop socialization, culturalization, and economic and fiscal policy over a period of time in which to get comfortable with it and understand it? They haven't had that time. And that's why they reach out to a number of different countries to come in. And that's why there are 10 million expatriates in Saudi Arabia out of the 30 million people. They need help and guidance in handling their billions of dollars of oil money. So here's the layout here. These are the male colleges, and female colleges that they started with in 2015. Actually, 2014 is when it started. And we were the ones that were operating TIFE. TIFE was focused on business, hospitality, and tourism. Now, the other aspect is that, when you look at Saudi Arabia, 20 million nationals and 10 million expats for a total of 30 million people. Even though they only have 30 million people compared to some of the other countries in the world, like the USA's 320 or China's 1.4 billion, Saudi Arabia has the largest women's-only university in the world. This is Princess Noor University. It has a capacity of 60,000 women. Right now, the enrollment is about 35,000. And again, us being criticized for only having a men's-only university, we sent them this information saying, well, you know what? Saudi Arabia has the largest only women's-only university in the world. But guess what? They didn't print that. So this is Princess Noor University, women's only. Okay, so in April of 2014, after doing my research, I packed my bags and I made my first visit to Saudi Arabia. And I learned very quickly that being aware of prayer times is very, very important. They have prayer times 6 times a day. And during prayer times, everything closes down. I mean, everything. And depending on how close the prayer times are together, sometimes a business can be closed for upwards of 3 hours at a time. So the saying in Saudi when we were there was, when is prayer time? Anytime you need something. That's what time prayer time is. So we had an app on our phone that we would use to give us warnings about when prayer times were, and we had a little notification. So when prayer time was coming up, you give us a warning in order to function during the business day, and also at night when we need to, actually just before dusk, because the last prayer time is at dusk. So this is an example of what prayer time is. Sound coming through? So there are towers throughout every city, and every city has a speaker, and every tower is manned by a prayer caller. So 6 times a day, and sometimes as early as 4 o'clock in the morning, if that's when dawn is, because that's when the first prayer is, those speakers and callers are on the job. And the call can last sometimes up to 10 minutes. And then the prayer time lasts for about 10, 15 minutes after that.
Hey, Dave, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
So one of the things that you said is everything shuts down. Yeah,
Yep.
I'm seeing lots of vehicles, lots of people walking on the street. And I guess I just assumed, I thought I might see silence and maybe people bowing on the street. So what?
Well, prayer happens in the mosques. Sometimes within stores, they'll close the windows and they'll do prayer inside, but nobody prays outside in the street. There is a group called Matawa, and that actually a lot has changed in Saudi Arabia over the last even just 6 months. the Matawa has lost some power. The Matawa are the religious police, and they would go around and tell people, go pray, and chase people off the streets. So they usually go to a mosque or to a private place to pray.
So if somebody's working, they would leave work, head to a mosque, pray, come back?
Sometimes they would do that, or they would just close the business down, depending, because remember, 1 out of every 3 people there is not a national Saudi. So there's a number of people there who are not Muslim, and they don't observe it, but they have to respect it. It's actually against the law in Saudi Arabia to practice any other religion except Islam.
Mm.
So there are no other churches to go to. There are mosques, period.
Thanks.
So I got to Saudi Arabia, and when I arrived in Taif, the building that we were to take over as a college was a repurposed old vocational school, which had been abandoned for about 10 years. So it was in pretty poor shape. So they were reconstructing it, refurbishing it. But when I got there, it wasn't done. By August, we were 1 month out. We still had no plumbing, no internet, no finished classrooms, no cafeteria or food services, no library, no tables, chairs, no office supplies, no computers, no phones, and no teachers.
Probably would be a shorter list of what you did have.
Yeah, I know, exactly. Well, and also our commercial license wasn't complete, which means we had no bank account, no insurance, no health and safety certificate, and no legal entity in Saudi. And I was 1 month away from opening the doors. So given all that, I realized that, I needed some help. Oh, and by the way, doing business there was also very difficult because there are no addresses in Saudi Arabia. It's all done by landmarks. You have something delivered, you say it's across from this business, down the street from this mountain. There are no addresses. They have street names, but no addresses. And also, many businesses don't take foreign credit cards. And since we had no bank, we had no Saudi credit cards. So we had to carry cash with us from Canada and change it when we got there, or get an ATM account with an international access to our bank back home and go and draw the maximum amount every day just to make payroll once we started operation. It was not an ideal situation. But this is the front gate of the campus. This is inside. You see it's still under construction. And all great on the outside, but inside nothing was finished. They all just refurbished the outside, but none of the plumbing or internet or anything was finished. So I realized very quickly that I needed help in Saudi Arabia because it's who you know in Saudi Arabia, how you get things done. So I went out and found a gentleman. His name was Mr. Atala. He's the one on the right there, to my right. The one on the left, on my right, on the left of the screen there, is the governor of Taif. I went out and hired Mr. Atala, and he'd be the Saudi equivalent to Peter Mansbridge on CBC or Dan Rather on CBS. He was a retired news anchor who was presently the editor-in-chief of the Mecca News, and I put him on retainer because I needed somebody to cut through the red tape for me. So I hired him, and within 3 days, he had me on national TV talking about the development of the college system in Saudi Arabia. So this was on Saudi One, which is the national news station. And I had about 3 hours preparation before I knew I was going to be on the air. He said, be down to the TV station in 3 hours because you're going on for a 1 hour interview on national TV on Saudi One. So that was my introduction to how things get done in Saudi Arabia. As soon as I had him on retainer, things started to happen. He also set up a number of press conferences for us, which we hosted TV, radio, and newspaper people, which gave us the exposure we needed. So when we went to ask for something, people knew who we were. The other thing I did is I set up a college advisory council. I went out and I contacted as many leaders within business and government as I could and asked them to be an advisory council for the school. And again, this was done for networking, political purposes, and also for, to establish ourselves as an entity within the business community. This is our first class of TIFE. We ended up, within that 1 month, we were able to recruit 127 students for our first class. As I mentioned before, Niagara College now has 4 campuses, 2 men and 2 women. And we have over 3,000 students now in those 4 campuses. And we started with this one group in a half-built college with no plumbing and 127 eager students. Now, one thing I did there is I tried to understand the culture, because without understanding the culture, you're really not going to go anywhere. And that really applies to any country you go into. But since I was going to be there for 2 years, and I had to build this college from scratch, I had to understand the culture. One of the things we found out is that the Saudi perception of hotel and hospitality management was not very high. They considered that as a service occupation. So almost all of our students selected business management. And the reason for that is that there's a program called Saudiization in Saudi, where the government requires a certain number of Saudis to work in every company. And one of the reasons that they're doing this whole college initiative is to get their Saudi population up to speed from an education perspective. Saudiization, though, previous to that, required these companies to have Saudis on staff. So what they would do is they would hire a Saudi, but hire an expatriate to do the work, and the Saudi would be there for quota purposes, and the Saudi wouldn't have to do anything, which is obviously not good for the development of the Saudi economy or the Saudi workforce. So the students that were in TIFE actually came from rural communities. TIFE was a city of about 500,000, but it was very spread out, and most of them were farmers, and a lot of them registered at the school because they wanted these types of jobs. Now, it was also important to note that the college only got paid for students who attended 80% of classes. They just don't, school for the TIFE group, it wasn't a real priority. They came from farms. Their first priority was family and farming. School was down the list. So it was a challenge for us to get them to come to school and be there 80% of the time. Our funding was based on that.
Dave, did you know that in advance when you made the decision to go in?
There's a lot of things I didn't know before I got there. Yeah. Learning the culture. I should have done a lot more research on the culture before I got there and the whole system and how the Saudi operation works. But again, 2 years worth of experience was a very good educator. So when somebody was hired to work for me at the college, I required that they spend a half hour with me in my office before they started to talk about culturalization. And I used to tell people, don't ask why does that happen and why don't they do this, and because you're just going to drive yourself crazy. What you have to do is understand the culture and how to operate within it. So, for example, learning different things like what does bin mean in a name, like Mohammed bin Salman. Well, that means Mohammed, son of Salman, just like we're all aware of Osama bin Laden. That means Osama, son of Laden. Abu means father of, and it's a sign of respect. So if you say Abu Anas, it means you are the father of Anas, who's your son. Communicating with women who are not your wife or your sister is prohibited unless you have the permission of the man who's with her. If a woman is in a store and she's by herself, you do not talk to her. There are no public photographs of women. If you're entering an elevator in Saudi Arabia and there's a woman on the elevator, you do not get on the elevator. If there's a man and a woman on the elevator, you wait for the man to invite you on the elevator. Little things like that. No alcohol of any kind is permitted anywhere. Even the Listerine that's sold in drugstores is alcohol-free. It's very much a night culture because it's so hot during the day. The kids you'll see at 2 o'clock in the morning in a mall, there'll be little kids running around with their mother, because during the day they sleep if they're not in school. A number of things. You never show the bottom of your shoes while seated, very insulting. There's no entertainment, but that's changing now. The new Crown Prince is changing some of that, bringing entertainment complexes into Saudi Arabia, which is a nice change. Many public places have singles and family sections. Men cannot go into the family section without their wife, and women can't obviously go into the single section at all. It's just for men. In Saudi, I found out the hard way too. It's very important to stay hydrated all the time if you're not used to it. And where I was in Taif is a mile high, so the air was thin and it was very dry. And unless you stayed hydrated, you got yourself into trouble very quickly. You have to stay hydrated. A few of the events worth noting: when we're going to open up our campus. We started in September, and by January we have our second intake. We were informed by the Colleges of Excellence that the crown of the Prince Sultan, who's the guy on the right there, was coming to open up the campus. This is the son of the present king, King Solomon. This is his son. The one in the middle is Prince Michel, who was the son of the existing king at that time, King Abdullah, who was still alive in January. He actually died near the end of that month. But he was the Prince of Mecca, again, a very big deal. So these guys were coming to our campus, and there are a number of things we needed to get fixed at the campus. We just couldn't get done working with municipality. As soon as they heard that the princes were coming, it literally got fixed overnight. Everything was fixed overnight. Now, Sultan bin Salman was the guy you saw in the picture there. He was actually the first astronaut of royal blood and the first Arab and Muslim to fly in outer space. I got to know him during his visit. We started talking about flying because I'm a pilot as well. And we got to know each other fairly well. And all the trouble that I was having with the political aspects of the local government went away when they knew that he liked me. So a lot of my problems disappeared just from one conversation with this guy. So understanding the culture is very important, and participating with them in their various activities and their outdoor picnics, shopping, restaurants, and driving are probably the main pastimes, because there's really not a lot else to do. This is a Saudi picnic that we set up on the top of one of the mountains there in Taif to celebrate with some of our staff. This is the view from there. Again, it said it's a mile high. It's a Saudi barbecue. That's me, and actually Dan Patterson is the president of the college. We had him over to visit. And the tourism, they have an annual tourism celebration, which we were always invited to as the college. And they know how to put on a buffet. I was also invited to a Saudi wedding. So just a short, in a Saudi wedding, the Saudi men are on one side and the Saudi women are on the other side. There is, again, no mixing of gender. So they actually put on two wedding ceremonies at the same time, or two wedding celebrations at the same time. Also, when it comes to the young men of the country, again, boys will be boys, but and again, managing these young men in the college was a challenge. Again, they didn't have a lot of outlet. They don't date. It's not allowed. Um, there's no entertainment or shows for them to go to. So they find different ways to entertain themselves. And this is one of the ways they do it.
والدرب حد يمشي لين اقصاه ولا حد انقصر بعض المواقف تجرح الرجال وتجيب العلوم والدرب حد يمشي لين اقصاه ولا حد انقصر الدرب ما يبغى ضعيف البصر هزع العزوم اللي يهرول في الساعة ويضيع حزة العسر يا هاجسي وجه الخصوص دق من وجه العموم وانا بشر واشوف والانسان لا وجهة نظر احد يعوم البحر واحد في البحر يعجز يعوم واللي ما يعرف للبحر حذر الصامل اللي يشتري في السوق لو غيره يسوم والغالية يفرق في سامتها ولو زاد السعر واللي تثنى دونها يالله جاله ما يقوم هذاك لا تحسب عليه يا ظهرنا بالقشر واهل الوفا ترف ولا فيها علامة
Yeah, I know. I think that speaks for itself. This was taken in Doha, Qatar, actually, but this, which is right beside, again, on the east coast of Saudi Arabia. Tigers and cheetahs are common pets that they have in Saudi Arabia. And when they get too big, they just release them in the wild. But this is a tiger that found its way back down to downtown Doha. Another challenge we had when we were there called MERS, which is Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome, which was the coronavirus, which was prevalent in a lot of different places across the Middle East. We actually had one technical person on our staff who died from it. So it was a constant, cautionary for us, making sure you wash your hands. And the main places were hospitals where it was the outbreak. And the technical guy who actually worked for us, who passed away, had a subcontract and worked in a hospital, and that's where we got it. And again, we still had no bank account at the end of the first semester, so we were continually going to ATMs, taking out a maximum amount of money to make payroll, which is another challenge. So we had no lack of challenges. This is the college here. After we got some signage up and got things going. So we had signage is very important there, as I mentioned, because the addresses aren't there. You have to stand out. Then at the end of the first year, I got a notice from my vice president who said, we've just agreed to take over the second college in Saudi Arabia. And I thought he was crazy, but it was an absolute brilliant decision from the college's perspective, because it now has allowed us to expand into 4 campuses. But at that time, the reason we were giving the Mecca College is because TIFE, within the 39 colleges in the country, TIFE was rated as the #1 college with all the metrics that they use as far as measuring the success of the colleges. We came out as #1. So they offered us another college, and they asked me to take care of the second college. The second college is in Mecca. Now, in Mecca, there's a place called the Haram Zone, where if you're not Muslim, you can't go in. There's actually a highway that's the non-Muslim highway that runs into Mecca. So if you're not Muslim, you can't go down that highway. So to get to this college, I had to take the non-Muslim highway to get to it, which was on the outskirts of the Haram Zone. And the non-Muslim highway was 2 lanes across, and I've never seen more accidents in my life. Many times I was traveling down the road, and people would be 4 and 5 across on a 2-lane highway. Yeah, I drove for 2 years in Saudi Arabia, and to get to this college, I had to go down what's called the Al Hada Mountain Road. Ahata Mountain Road is considered to be one of the top 10 most dangerous driving experiences in the world, and I had to drive it twice a week for a year and a half. The Ahata Mountain Road goes from the bottom all the way up to the top in Taif. Again, it's a mile vertical, and it takes about a half hour to drive this particular road to get to the top of the mountain. Along the way are the Taif Mountain baboons, which are famous. They've been highlighted on Natural Geographic. Dogs are not revered in Saudi Arabia. They're actually seen as being dirty. Nobody has pet dogs. They have cats. So there's many stray dogs, and the stray dogs that live in the mountains, it's actually the Taif baboons that raise the puppies of the stray dogs, and that was focused on in a National Geographic special. Now, Saudi Arabia has changed a lot just since I've been there. And the last year, King Salman, you see in the middle there, and ABS he's called, MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, who's the crown prince, the guy on the left there. He's the one making all the changes, allowing women to drive, which is a big deal. They've never been allowed to drive before. Starting this July, they're going to be allowed to drive. And I know what it's like to drive in Saudi Arabia. And with that many new drivers on the road, it is going to be even more dangerous. It's one of the top 5 countries in the world as far as driving, fatalities and dangerous driving. And I can vouch for that because I drove there for 2 years. I remember driving to work one day along the highway, and I wish I had taken a picture, but you can't stop on the highway there. There was a guy standing beside a car, and his car, and I'm not lying to you, his car was in a tree, not against a tree. It was in the tree. He was driving, hit the curb, and the car went airborne and got stuck in a tree, which I've never seen more accidents in my life than in Saudi Arabia. So with that many new drivers on the road, it will be challenging, but good for the women to win that right to drive. One thing that I realized that, there's 2 ways to change a country. One is through war or crisis, and the other is through education. And we knew that being in Saudi Arabia as a college would have an impact. But the impact I didn't think about was the staff that I would hire. And I hired a number of different people from around the world to come to work at the college. One guy, his name is Dured, and he's the one on the right of your screen there with the tie on. He's a Syrian refugee who was in Saudi Arabia, and we hired him, and he was there with his wife and 2 kids. And he had a business back home. His wife had a business. And in the last year that I was there, his business was burnt to the ground. His wife's business was burnt, and most of his family were killed. And he was more or less stuck in Saudi Arabia. And we hired him as one of our business managers for the hotel operation we had there. And again, the impact that we've had on these people and the stories that they've had changed my life as far as understanding, giving a perspective on what's happening in different parts of the world. Now, Dured has 2 kids. He has a daughter and a son. This is Ali. Ali he's 5 years old, and he was born with a disability. He has 2 club feet, and he can't walk. And he gets around by pulling himself around by his hands and dragging himself across the floor. We're having dinner there that night, and a song came on the TV. And without a hesitation, Ali got down and started dancing on his knees. And he's the happiest kid I've ever seen in my life. And it was just a real pleasure to spend time with his family, to see how happy they were, but understanding what they'd been through as a family was really impactful. Ali's going through a number of different operations right now, and because his father's working at Niagara College, he's been able to afford these operations. So it's again part of the impact that we've had in seeing how we can support his family. And you still got about 4 or 5 more operations to go through. before he can actually walk, or they hope he can walk. When I was leaving that night, I remember going to the door, and I was just about to leave, and I could hear some scraping sound, and then the people around the door parted, and there was Ali's dragging himself across the floor, coming over to shake my hand. He got down up to my feet, and he reached up, and he said the only words he knew in English. He just said, "Thank you." And I'll never forget that. I mean, he made an effort to drag himself across the floor because he wanted to make sure he said goodbye to me before I left. So when I was in Saudi Arabia, I had a great opportunity to see the different sites of the country. These are the two guys that I roped into coming over with me. But the guy on the right did some math and business for me, and the one in the middle, he's actually a professor at Elon University in North Carolina. Childhood friend. We've been friends since grade 2. But he was on a sabbatical, and I convinced him to come over to Saudi Arabia and act as the chair of business for me at the college. And it was great having them there for the second year, because the first year I was living in a hotel with all the Saudis. Everybody thinks you go to Saudi Arabia and live in a nice big compound with a swimming pool. Well, I lived with the Saudis in the first year, and I learned a lot about the country and the people. The second year we lived in a small compound, and these two guys were with me. Behind us is El Wahab crater, which is a place where a volcanic reaction hit an aquifer and blew out a 1 mile across crater, which is one of the sites in Saudi Arabia. This is Medina Sala, which are tombs carved out of the rock. It's like a mini Petra. It's in the northern part of the country. And the thing about Saudi Arabia is when you go to these sites and the tourist attraction, there's nobody there because there's no tourism in Saudi Arabia. I mean, it's very difficult to get into the country, and that's changing too. But all these sites are almost untouched, and very few people have ever seen them. I would go to the animal market and pick out, we had a Thanksgiving dinner, so we went and pick out our turkey, but at the animal market, you could buy anything from turkeys to camels to ostriches. And they butcher them right there for you, and you take it home. What allowed me in Saudi Arabia, in the Middle East, I took advantage of going to the various countries around the Middle East, because otherwise I wouldn't have had the opportunity. This is in Jordan. This is Petra. You probably recognize it from the Indiana Jones movie, The Last Crusade. This is Doha, Qatar. Bahrain. Oman. The fjords of Kasab, Oman, which is, you can see Iran from there. It's right across the strait from Iran. In Dubai, UAE, United Arab Emirates. Istanbul, Turkey, this is the Blue Mosque. Egypt, pyramids at Giza. It's the Nile. And that's pretty much it. So we made a lot of friends in Saudi Arabia. We have good relationship as the college there. We continue to do business in Saudi Arabia. We have 4 campuses there now, which has grown from our meager 127 student start in the fall of 2014. And the college continues to invest in the operation there because I think we are making an impact on its people. And as I said, the 2 ways to change a culture is through war and crisis or through education. And we think that our educational input is having an impact. So thank you very much.
Wow, Dave, thank you so much. This was absolutely incredible. I've got pages of notes, and I want to open it up to questions, but since I've got the mic first, I'm going to actually ask you a couple questions. And
sure.
One thing that I noted at the very beginning and just was reinforced again is just this whole thing about, difference and fear perspective and how important it is to get to know people and break down some of those barriers, how alike we really are. And how sometimes the media can create and we can just follow without questioning. So I thank you for breaking some of that down. But I have a question about, and it might be my understanding, but you talked about the school itself, that the students want to go into business admin because the tourism was more of a service type aspect. So it sounded like it was not as high as the business part. And then one of the last points you just made was that there is no tourism there, and I'm thinking that's what you're developing is the tourism. So I guess you're teaching and they're graduating. So if there's no tourism, where are they working? How are they practicing?
Yeah, let me qualify that. When I say no tourism, I mean from our perspective on tourism, they don't draw people from around the world for anything else really but Mecca. Mecca draws, millions and millions of dollars for them. So it's very specific about Mecca. Now, the students who do find jobs in tourism there, it's really the local tourism. Taif is a tourism actually destination for Saudis because all the Saudis go to Taif because it's cooler in the summer and it's a little bit warmer in the winter. So most of the tourism is Saudi nationals traveling around the country and people who are already in the country. Very few people who come from outside go anywhere else other than Mecca.
Thanks, Dave.
I have a question, Dave, and it's with regard to the headdress. I know there's sort of everything just seems to be either red or white or all white. Is there some sort of reasoning behind that?
Yeah, well, the red and the white comes from the British influence way back when Saudi was started, back in the 1930s. And it's a traditional headdress. I've asked that myself. There is no specific meaning behind it. White is a little more formal. You'll find that Saudis will wear the white headdress when they have their upper dress on, as far as over top of their thobes. So white tends to be a little more formal, whereas the red is more day-to-day, like we would wear blue jeans or a sport jacket. And they all wear mostly white thobes, but I have seen different colors thobes in the wintertime, gray or brown. But 9 times out of 10, they're wearing a white thobe, which is the gown, or the red and white gutra, which is the headdress.
And first, I want to thank you. That was most informative. You've raised my level of understanding significantly. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, I pared it down from 2 hours. I tried to there's a lot that I haven't talked about, because in 2 years, a lot happened.
Well, I was engrossed for the 40 minutes or whatever it was, and I'm sure if you were talking for 2 hours, it would have been I would have been the same eagerness, listening to you for that. It really was fascinating.
It is a fascinating country, and it's very misunderstood. I think the biggest point I make to people is that cultural evolution takes time, and the country was only really founded in the 1930s, and before that, it was under the Ottoman Empire. And then it broke loose under the United Kingdom's, support with King Saud to become Saudi Arabia. And it's only been in the last 50 years, 50, 60 years that they've had money, and they've went from tents to metropolis.
Yeah.
So they still have a lot of the old traditions and ways of thinking, but it's understandable. It's not appropriate to compare Saudi Arabia today to us today, because they haven't had the same opportunity to evolve.
Dave,
yeah.
Did you find the young people more receptive to wanting to learn about the Western world, or do they follow tradition?
It's kind of a combination of both. When I was there, I did a research a project with some of the students there, and the students we had there, I must say, at least half of them registered for the stipend. Students in Saudi Arabia don't pay for education; it's paid for by the government. And in the college system, they actually, when they register, they get 1,000 SAR a month, which is about $300 Canadian a month, just to register. Many of them, because their parents weren't educated, weren't brought up about the importance of education, and many of them came to school for the money. There was about half of them, though, that recognized it and didn't make it into university for whatever reason, and didn't make it into the military, so it was their third choice. The police force and the military, whenever they had a membership drive, we lost half our students. So some understood the value of education, but again, you have to remember how they were brought up. The school system there for primary school, 90% of their curriculum is the Quran for the first 6 or 7 years of their school. They don't learn numeracy, literacy. The discipline in the high schools is almost non-existent. But you also have to realize, too, that the family structure over there is very different. In the research that I did with some of the groups, part of the qualifying data I used to identify the respondents asked about their family situation and how many brothers and sisters they had. The average number of brothers and sisters was about 12, and I had one kid who had over 20 brothers and sisters. He told me a story about him going to register the newest member of their family with his father, and they went to register him, and they asked the father what the name would be, and he said, it's going to be Faisal. And he said, no, Dad, we already have one of those. Okay, then how about, he went through about 3 or 4 names. He couldn't even remember the names of his own kids. He had 20 kids. So if you can't remember their names, what kind of supervision do they have? So that's why you see them driving the way they are. And I mean, the father can't watch 20 kids. So their whole, again, you have to understand the culture and how it's evolved and what their attitude is. And you have to understand where they're coming from. And that's why we're there, is to provide context for education.
That's amazing. Dave, can you hear me?
I can.
Can you see me?
I can.
Oh, good, because somehow I hid myself from my own screen, so I can't tell whether I'm in this or not. So
no, you're back loud and clear.
Okay, good. That was phenomenal, like absolutely phenomenal. And having been to Istanbul and Turkey and experiencing Cappadocia, which is sort of central, like very close to some of the areas that you were in, and I have so much respect for Niagara College for having the courage and strength to go into a country like Saudi Arabia and do what it did. So there's a couple of things. So I just finished my MBA in HR. And so one of the courses I took was on global HR and a lot about expats and their experiences. So I'm really, really curious. Part of me is like, oh, I wish I had seen this a year ago, because I would have taken you out for dinner and talked to you about this for my course. But I'm really curious to know what it was like for you as an expat going to Saudi Arabia, being there for 2 years. And then also the other thing I learned was coming back and the transition back to the Canadian culture that you walked away from. So I would love to hear a little bit more about your experience in that way.
Yeah, I mean, people don't think reverse culture shock is a thing, but I can tell you it really is. In order to survive in another culture, you have to assimilate fairly quickly in order, to make sure that you're functional and happy and can communicate. So you become accustomed to some of the things in your environment. Over there, I mean, not communicating with women. I mean, as a Canadian, you want to be, friendly, but you have to learn the do's and don'ts. And that was difficult at the beginning. Although the women, when you see them dressed in black, it's a pretty good cue that, you're not supposed to talk to them. But even walking along the streets there, I never felt threatened. I never felt unsafe. one of my very first trip to Riyadh, though, I did learn the hard way about prayer time and being hydrated, because I got caught halfway between my hotel and the Kingdom Tower in downtown Riyadh. And it's all cement, and it was 50 degrees Celsius. So it was hot. And then prayer time hit, and I didn't have any water with me. So I had to find a shady spot and just kind of stay still for half an hour, because I was on the verge of passing out with not having water and being in like an oven, because the cement was just radiating heat. And it's the other thing in Saudi, very few people walk around because it's so hot. Saudis, unfortunately, have the highest rate of diabetes in the world. They have 1 of every 3 people has type 2 diabetes because of the poor diet and lack of exercise. And the lack of exercise is just because it's just too damn hot. But as far as culture, understanding the culture and how to work within it is critical in order to communicate with people. And hanging on to your cultural norms and asking why things are done doesn't serve anybody. And that's the conversation I had with every new hire.
Wow, that's I think you did a lot of research, it sounds like, before you left, to really understand the culture that you were coming into, and being as prepared as you could. But I'm sure as prepared as you can be going in, I'm sure there were lots of surprises once you got there.
Oh no, yeah, there's lots to learn. I mean, having the freedom back here when I got back home, that the stores are going to be open, or that there's things aren't going to close down, and being able to communicate with whoever I felt was appropriate to communicate with, were all things that you started, you don't take for granted once you're back home, because you didn't have that while you were away. Yeah.
Wow. So 2 more quick questions. I'm curious to know how the college is set up in Saudi Arabia. So I'm glad you mentioned that, the students that are coming there are actually getting paid to be there. Very different than, I guess it's like an OSAP for us here. But so is the college set up as a not-for-profit? Is it how is it set up from a business perspective? And then my second curiosity is whether women are respected. So a lot of the cultural differences around women in Saudi Arabia, are they respected? Are they minimalized? Are they, what is that relationship like? Because to us, it feels different maybe than what it actually is when you're there.
Yeah, well, that's your first question first. The college does have a separate corporation set up, Niagara College Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Niagara College KSA, and it is run for profit. And that's one of the reasons we took on the other 4 or the other 3 campuses. I have 4 campuses now. We have our corporate offices now in Riyadh. So having some kind of, critical mass and efficiency to have overhead to serve 4 campuses was part of the business plan. So the college does use the Saudi operation as part of its revenue stream, and it is meant to be a profit to invest back in Niagara College Canada. Second part about women, and again, it's always hard to answer those questions, because if you ask the same question in any other country, there is no one answer. There are factions in Canada that you would be disgusted about, on how women are treated or how minorities are treated and so on. And the same thing is in Saudi. In general, women are very much respected, and that's why, that's why they're segregated, so that out of respect and also distraction, and because of the religious, rules around non-integration. But I would say that on the whole, women need to go a little bit further. I mean, I don't think they're at the level they need to be yet in Saudi Arabia. This new crown prince is addressing that, giving them the right to drive, and expanding the rights to allow them to be on their own without having the permission of a male guardian, is a step in the right direction. He realizes that. So are they at the level they need to be? No, they're not. Is the Are they on the right path? Yes, I believe they are.
That's really great. I had the pleasure of meeting someone from Saudi Arabia at a Dale Carnegie International Convention, and I had lunch with him. And he, the fact that we offered to even pay for lunch, which would be the Canadian way,
Yeah.
oh, let me pay. He was almost mortified. There was just absolutely no way that we would have paid for our own dinner. But he talked about a little bit about how much respect he had for his wife and women in the culture, and he led me to believe that women were really cherished by their men, but it, you know, in a public way, it doesn't necessarily appear to be that way, but that they very much are respected by their husbands, and even though the beliefs and the cultural norms are very different than ours.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's a large number who feel that way, and they're just like in any culture, there are differences, and the one extreme to the other. But in general, women are respected, but not given, I think, the freedoms they need so that they can respect themselves.
Fantastic. Any other questions or comments? I'm sure, I mean, I'm supposed to honor the timeline, Dave, but I feel like we could just keep going and no one would mind. But I'll just do one last roll call if there's any other questions for Dave before we begin to wrap it up.
Nothing for me, just a very quick personal thank you, David, for taking the time this evening to do it.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
And Angela, I'll add this too, that I'll send an email to all those members that weren't here tonight and encourage them. I think everybody's head is nodding to say, take the time to come and listen to this and pass along to some of your friends. And I'll remind them that you'll be sending out the link later on after you post it onto our onto the site.
Yes, thank you. I will do that. I saved it onto my own computer, so I may I should be able to do that shortly after our session here tonight. So, and from me too, Dave, thank you so much for being here. My goodness, this was phenomenal. And I don't know, we may have to invite you back when we have a real big audience, because this was worthy of an entire full screen of people listening to you. So,
well, I've got a few other countries I've been to, so I can talk about those as well.
Well, look at you. You're going to be like a monthly feature at the Rotary Club. Let's go around the world with Dave.
There you go.
Other Rotary clubs have travel logs. We just have Dave come in here.
That's right. We've got Dave.
Yeah, in the last 3 years, I've done about 200 flights.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Too many. I need to slow down.
Yeah, and well-deserved slowdown too, I'm sure. Fantastic. So, Lori, do you want to do the final sort of?
Dave, you wowed me as you always do, and just to jump on everybody else's comments, it really was eye-opening and fascinating, and you had our attention. And I look forward to being able to share this with the rest of the group. And I just did a quick post on my Facebook to make sure that you're thanked and other people know the contribution that you make. Certainly with changing our world. I mean, this is a big one. I love that insight of we change through crisis and war and through education. And so you're bringing your passion for good. So thank you for doing that.
Thanks very much for having me, everybody. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
We good, Angela? Do we
I'm going to stop.